Hello again everybody and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to take you through my top 10 tips for surviving your very first few flights on the VATSIM network. As you guys will be well aware, I pretty much always only ever fly on the VATSIM network, and I'm always joined by some of you as we fly live on the network as well, which is always really very nice. And what I want to do, for those of you who might not be that confident, is not only introduce all my tutorials to you, but also give you some tips to help you get through that first flight. As always, hit subscribe, give us a like, and let me know how you get on in the comments below as well. And if you're a VATSIM veteran, or perhaps done your first flight and you've got some tips that you'd like to share with the community, then pass it on via the comments and let us all know too. So, the very first one goes without saying, know your aircraft. Now, whether you prefer flying IFR or VFR on the network, you're going to need to be able to distinguish the difference between the two. And whatever aircraft you choose to fly, for example we're in the Aerosoft CRJ at the moment, you need to know exactly how to fly it. You need to know what all the different switches do, how to set headings, how to set courses, vectors, speed constraints, and program that flight management computer as well. Amongst all the other stuff, managing the engines, the fuel flow, slats, flaps, spoilers, radios especially, and transponders as well. So you need to know how to operate those, how to set all the codes, and deal with anything ATC might throw at you whilst you're flying the aeroplane. So that's the very first tip. Going on from that as well, you need to understand how all the systems work as well. So FMS wise, for example, you need to know how to work through adding in your flight plan, and perhaps even adding in an automatic hold, flying some fixes, and know how to manage should the plan change. If you're flying into an airfield, for example, and the weather's changing, the runway therefore changes as well, and the VATSIM controller switches the runway to the opposite direction, you might need to change your arrival if you're flying in. So the approach controller might tell you, actually, it's going from one arrival procedure to another, and you need to know how to add all that in and perhaps receive vectors and descend with ATC instructions. And you've got to ask yourself, can you manage all of that whilst flying the aeroplane, following the basic principles of aviate, navigate, communicate. Tip number 2 then, always use charts. Now, depending on what airport you fly to, the taxi routes to the runway or from the runway might be extremely complex. There might be specific routes for specific size aircraft, for example A380s, Boeing 747s as well, might have a specific route required for taxi to and from the runway and the stands. So you need to know exactly how to follow those instructions when ATC tell you to taxi to stand 54 via Juliet, Papa, Lima, Quebec, so on and so forth. And follow those instructions not only to the letter, but also read them back to the controller so they know that you've understood what they've asked you to do. So the next thing you need to know within this point is how to fly SIDS and stars. So on departure, if you're going IFR for example in an airliner, you're probably going to fly a standard instrument departure. And on arrival, you're probably going to be flying in with a standard arrival route as well into an airfield. And you need to know exactly how to do those, not only how to set them in the flight management computer depending on the aircraft that you're flying, but also how to fly them should anything bug out, and understand how the constraints work within those as well. So speed and altitude constraints are quite common. You guys will always know I use Navigraph regularly, and I've done loads of tutorials on the channel as well showing you guys how to understand in a basic sense the charts with everything you need to know to survive your flights on VATSIM. How constraints work, whether they be speed or altitude, and also how to fly things like VOR approaches, ILS approaches and things too. Know the difference between all of them and understand how to work each of those different approaches should you be required to by ATC. Not everything is a ILS approach, of course. So you might fly into somewhere like Samos and you'll be required to perform a VOR, DME or circle to land approach, and you need to know how to operate the aircraft on those approaches. So the third tip then, watch videos and learn the radio phraseology. So A lot of you that watch regularly will know that I've done loads of tutorials on the channel showing you how to talk on the radio and what you might need to say and do depending on what the controllers require of you as well. Think of it as a bit of a merry dance, and the controllers are managing 10, 20, 30 aircraft all within a tight airspace, and you're managing one of those aeroplanes. So you might not see what the radar controllers can see on their screen, if you like. They might ask you to do something, and you need to understand what they're asking and how to perform that request as well. If you're not sure how the phraseology works, keep it basic and watch my videos. Watch the tutorials that I've done on how to get started on VATSIM. I keep it really basic, so I give you all of the stuff that you need to know to get you started confidently on the network. And try not to overthink things. You'll learn by doing, and of course I've also done some free PDF documents to help as well, so you can download those. The link will be in the description for this video. You can download those and hopefully you'll find lots of them useful, and they include things like example conversations as well. What I'd probably also recommend is watching my live streams. I will stream quite regularly, and within all of those I'm pretty much always flying on the VATSIM network, so you can happily watch along and you can listen to what I say, listen to what I do, and you can sort of see how it all works with a full flight on the VATSIM network as we switch perhaps between maybe full flights with full ATC and occasional ones where we're just on Unicom, and you can then also see how that all works as well. Tip number 4 then, folks: fly from airports that you're used to. Keep it nice and simple. If you've got an airport that has got one runway perhaps and just a handful of taxiways like Edinburgh, then what you're allowing yourself to do is give yourself more time to process information, and it'll also allow you to get back instructions from the controllers for taxiing that are only maybe 1 or 2 taxiways long, and in turn that will just give you the confidence that you need, and it'll also give you the ability to focus on all the different things that you need from the controllers. Because you've only got perhaps taxiway Alpha and Bravo, it will give you more time to think about everything else that you might want to do for your first VATSIM flight. What I would also add to this is do not fly from events straight away, or even busy evenings for that matter. Events themselves can get exceptionally busy, and for those of you who have watched my controller streams when I control at Manchester or Birmingham as an example, within 3 hours we regularly can get 300 aircraft connect. And if you're not used to stuff, you're not quite prepared, you haven't got charts like we mentioned in point 2, and you don't know how to use the aircraft, it can cause significant problems for everybody else partaking in those events. So by all means have a listen, connect as an observer mode so you're invisible and you can just sort of listen to how things work. But if controllers need you to read back quickly to manage the flow of traffic and you're not quite sure what to say in return, it can slow the general flow of the entire event down, especially as well if you are unable to sort of follow the instructions given to you by the controllers. And if you can't follow those instructions, then you can cause problems for not only yourself but multiple other pilots on the network. So do bear that in mind. As much as they're always really fun to take part in, I would really recommend getting that confidence first and getting a couple of flights done on the network to begin with before you delve straight into the carnage of an event. My next tip then, my favourite, I'll always go on about it every single live stream, and on all of my VATSIM tutorial videos that I've done as well I've mentioned it, I think. So tip number 5, always have a pen and paper handy. Every time I fly on the network, and if I control as well, I've always got a notepad and a pen ready to go. And I will write down at the very beginning, as you'll see in my PDF documents that I've created that you can use for free, there will be my call sign, the stand, the aircraft type, the departure route that I'm using, amongst a whole load of other stuff as well. What that does is it gives you the ability to just look at your piece of paper as a bit of a memory guide, so you can just throw the information out verbally to the controller when you're asking for your clearance, for example. You can then already preempt the departure routing that you're going to be given, thanks to the ATIS information that you will have already checked, and you can then write down all of your taxi instructions to the hold point for the runway nice and easily on the piece of paper, and then you can follow those on the charts as you make your way through the airport. And similarly, any frequencies that you might need to use, you can quickly jot all those down, or anything else that you might want. If you've got that pen and paper handy, then you've got yourself set up and you can take away some of that workload by writing it down. Tip number 6, practice the route offline before doing it online. So nice and easy, before you jump into a route, give it a little go for the very first time offline as well, and practice maybe 2 or 3 different times, and on different days with the live weather you might have a different runway in use, for example, and therefore a different star or a different SID, and it will give you the ability to adapt your flight plans on the fly should you be flying in offline, as a bit of a practice before you then add the realism of a VATSIM controller as well. So another little tip there is just give the route a go offline. Once, twice, once is usually enough, just to give yourself a bit of an idea of what you might expect when you actually then connect online for the first time. Leading on from there, then number 7, spend the time flight planning. If you've got things like a Navigraph subscription, like I do, you guys will know that I've got the Navigraph subscription. You can then update your SimBrief air racks. That will then give you the latest nav data, in addition to being able to import the latest nav data in Microsoft Flight Simulator as well. That's really crucial on the VATSIM network, because what it means is we can then fly to the latest worldwide global nav database, and it allows us to then plan our routes properly. So by spending a little bit of time doing a bit of flight planning well in advance of the flight itself, it gives us a little bit more time to just enjoy the experience, and it reduces the amount of pressure when it comes to actually trying to get our clearance for the first time. What we want to avoid is spawning in, getting all ready to go, excited for that first connection, that first real flight live on the network, and then having problems with either the navigation, the route that we've pre-filed, being incorrect or invalid depending on the route that we want to fly, and then having to get that amended by the controllers, or we've not quite set it up properly in the aircraft itself. And if that's the case, then usually we're going to depart and something will go wrong, and the controllers will then ask us what we're doing, because we're not flying the route that we have filed and been authorized for and cleared for by the controllers, and that in itself can then cause problems. If you find that you're doing something and it's going completely wrong, don't be afraid to just disconnect. You could make a little excuse up to the controller and say, oh, sorry, I've got internet problems, and then just disconnect and give it another go another time. Just spend that little bit more time planning your flight before you connect. That's really important, because it does then take away all the pressure. If you've got a decent route all planned, ready to go, and you've perhaps practiced the comms as well, that's pretty much the majority of what you need to worry about sorted. Where you're flying, how you're going to get there, that's the big one, and then saying and doing whatever the controllers require. If I strip it down to just those 2 little things, it makes it sound super simple, and that's all you need to worry about. So spend your time flight planning in advance of connecting, and try and get that route nice and correct. If it's not quite right, you've got the wrong standard instrument departure, for example, don't worry, the controllers will help you. What I will add to that though, of course, is if they give you a new SID in place of the one that you filed, or a different route, make sure you go through your FMS, your flight computer, your MCDU, and you add in whatever the controllers have given you as your new route, because that's what they're then going to input onto the VATSIM system. Similarly, if you don't have the latest AirAC, like I do, and you're using an older AirAC because you haven't got Navigraph, for example, then just put in your remarks for your flight plan what AirAC you're using. so the controllers can know there's a little bit of a difference there potentially with what you can do. Quickly going back to charts, one little tip: if you haven't got a Navigraph subscription, don't worry, you can use websites like chartfox.org, and what that will do is it will give you charts for free. So they're in a different format and you might have to piece the information together, but there are ways like ChartFox for you to obtain charts without having to pay for a annual or a monthly membership with Navigraph to get those awesome Jefferson charts. But if you sim regularly and you want it all in one nice little simple format, Navigraph is really, really useful, and I can't recommend it highly enough. So the next tip then, use the VATSIM website. Within the VATSIM website itself, there's a pilot resource center, and it's absolutely chock-a-block full of loads of free information about how to fly in different circumstances on the network itself, but also how to use the radios and things like Unicom frequencies and things like that. Within the VATSIM website as well, there are events, and you can find for events specific for new pilots on the network, and they're called First Wings events. So if you can find those, you can join in on those, and there will be a whole host of controllers that will be connected to the network live, specific for new pilots to get their confidence and give it a go. So it really is worthwhile checking that out. And check out the Pilot Resource Center. There is a whole host of information for you to sink your teeth into. The next tip for you then, from a bit of a recommendation from myself, is use voice. It is a lot easier, I promise you, to use voice than it is to use text on VATSIM. If, for example, now you are getting a late landing clearance and you had to then quickly break away from flying the aeroplane manually for this last little part of the approach to then type in clear to land runway 3 right and then your call sign, it's going to cause you problems, and it increases your workload a lot more than you realise. So try to get over that little bit of a worry of connecting to the VATSIM network and using voice, because you'll get a lot more out of it, and certainly a lot more enjoyment from it as well.
50, 40, 30, 20, 10.
Unicom is another important one. You want to tell people what you're doing on Unicom. So 122.8 is the frequency for that. And if you're departing or taxiing or anything else, let people know what you're doing. That's really important, because you will find people on the network that will just appear to land, and you could be lining up on the runway, or you could be trying to land, for example, and all of a sudden somebody departs in front of you on the runway and you then end up going around. Shouldn't happen, even on Unicom. So don't get into the habit of thinking, well, there's nobody around at the moment, so I'm just going to go. Put out on the VATSIM network on Unicom what you're going to be doing, whether you're going to be lining up and departing, what departure route you might be using, for example, and things like that. And all it does is help everybody else around you as well. So tell people what you're doing on Unicom. So one final tip from me then. Tip number 10, add new pilot to remarks. When you're filing your flight on the VATSIM network, whether it be IFR or VFR, if it's your first ever time flying on the network, you will have at the very bottom of your screen, or whether it be the website or the vPilot client itself, the ability to type into a little remarks section. And one of my biggest tips is to put in there new VATSIM pilot if it's your first time flying on the network. What it will then do is give the controller exactly that piece of information. So they will then be able to see that you are brand new to the network, and perhaps try and help you that little bit more. They might give you a bit more time to read back any requests that they make or any instructions they give you. They might also help you that little bit more with things like progressive taxi, and perhaps try and explain things in a bit more of a easy to understand way to make sure that your first VATSIM flight is a positive one. At most, we've just done those 10 tips, of course, and I hope you found them really useful. But the biggest piece of information or advice that I could probably offer is try and enjoy it. If you can really embrace the VATSIM way and that extra bit of immersion, that professional side to simming if you like, then you're going to really enjoy the network. You're going to get a lot out of it, flying with a load of other people who are like-minded, enjoying this sort of realistic style ATC as we fly along. And for those of you who might want to perhaps become a pilot in the future, it's going to give you a really good stepping stone, because a lot of the phraseology that you use on VATSIM is real world phraseology, so it will apply as much to real pilot training as it does flying on the network. I hope you found the video useful anyway. Be sure to hit like and subscribe as well if you've not done so already. Just takes a few seconds by clicking the buttons down below the video itself. If you want any links to anything like our free VATSIM PDF documents that I've created, then do check out the description for the video, and all the links to those will be included in there for you. In the meantime though guys, as always, I hope you found it useful and enjoyable. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Share your tips as well. If you've got some really good tips that I've not perhaps covered today, then let us all know in the comments below. And I hope to see you all on the VATSIM network in the very near future. Thanks for watching.